Hi, Renee.
Hi everyone. Today, as part of our Close Looking series, we're discussing two works that are currently on view at the AGO that use the medium of neon. They are Robert Markle's Angel from Michelangelo's from 1979 to 1980, and Laurel Woodcock's Untitled Neon Quotation from 2007. Given that the AGO is opening on July 2nd, which we are super excited about, we hope that you'll be able to see these works in person soon. And perhaps after listening to this discussion, you will be inspired to think of them in a new light, so to speak. So today, Nadia and I will give a brief background of neon in art, followed by a close look at each of the works individually, and we'll conclude with a discussion giving some more detail about the works and their context at the AGO.
Great. Hi, thank you, Renee, and thanks for the pun. That was great. I'm now just going to provide a very quick history on neon and art before we dive into the close look. So we can pull up the slide.
Yes.
Great.
Bear with me here.
No problem. I'll just start. So it was around the year 1910 when neon actually hit the stage as a medium for commercial signs. It is an element. In fact, it is the fifth most abundant element in our universe, which is something I just learned doing research for this. On its own, it is a fiery reddish orange, but with different elements added, neon can take on many hues, bright and beautiful signs, as we can see from this image. By the 1930s, it became a part of the North American commercial landscape, and cities really started to feel defined by neon signs, and the neon signs that blinked at night and early in the morning. And by the 60s, artists truly started incorporating neon into their work, expanding the medium's symbolic potential. This image that we're looking at here is a work by artist James Turrell, which many of you might recognize from Drake's music videos. But this is a 2000 work called Open Field. And this is an example of how neon transformed from the gritty, romantic beacons of the city to minimalist art, and stepped into the gallery. And there's plenty of well-known artists that use neon, including Bruce Nauman and Tracy Emin. All right, I think that is probably enough on neon. Renee, do you want to introduce us to Laurel Woodcock?
Absolutely. So here she is. I know. I've never met her or that dog, but I wish that I did. So Laurel Woodcock was a Toronto-based artist who worked in video, photography, sculpture, and installation. She was very interested in the use of everyday objects and industrial materials and kind of situations. She uses everyday materials to comment on language and perception in playful but also unsettling ways. And I think at the core of her practice is an exploration of how meaning is made. Her modes of production come from daily life, and she is really inspired by the legacy of conceptual art. She was born in 1960 in Ottawa and grew up in Montreal, and she studied fine arts at Concordia, and she did her MFA at NASCAD in Halifax. And it was actually during her MFA that she began to work with quotation marks. And her first quotation mark work was actually a large photograph, and it's a photograph of two hands going like this, the air quotes. So that, of course, is a gesture that we use when language is kind of empty or doesn't seem adequate. Since then, Laurel made works with air quotes in different media. She started moving into commercial and industrial materials, and eventually she made the work in neon in 2007. I will switch the slide. There we go. So there's the work in the AGO's collection. It's called Untitled. Oh my goodness. It's Untitled, blue quotations. And we acquired it as a gift from the artist in 2016, and that was actually the year before she passed away. So each of the quote marks is 18 inches by 18 inches, so it's a fair size. And as you can see, they're hung with plenty of space between them. So visually, in effect, they are quoting empty space. At the AGO, they're hung near an entrance, so near the south entrance, so one might momentarily actually mistake them for public signage, which is a complexity that I really love about them. And I will end with a quote. Laurel Woodcock said, "I think of text and language as a material, a raw material that I can manipulate and use sculpturally, especially in a public context." So on that note, now that I quoted a quote about a quote, Nadia, would you like to introduce Robert Markle?
Yes, I will. And I love the meta work that you're doing, Renee. All right, here is Robert Markle. This is a very cool photo of him riding a motorcycle. Robert Markle is a Mohawk artist who was born in Hamilton, Ontario in 1936, and he did die in Holstein, Ontario in 1990. And I apologize for the sirens that are going off right outside my window. Occupational hazards of Toronto living. Okay. All right, I will continue now. His career was eclectic. Not only was he an artist, but he was also a writer, an educator, and a musician. And in 1954, at the age of 18, he left Hamilton for Toronto to become, in his words, a big-time painter. There are those air quotes again. But he quickly realized the limits of the Ontario College of Art, now OCAD. Those limits were stifling his creativity, and he was expelled, but he immediately set out to find life drawing subjects where he could in the city. So being expelled did not stop his pursuit. So his story is so Toronto. It's like stepping into a time capsule. He would frequent the burlesque halls of Yonge Street and Spadina Avenue, and he was fascinated with dancers as models. And it was in those smoky rooms that a woman's body could be seen in all its power. He called their movements heroic. There was an aliveness to capturing a nude in movement, in contrast to the stationary studio model, who is instructed on what poses to strike. So it's a lot more rigid that way. And by the 60s, he was a key artistic figure in Toronto, embracing all the timely values of free love, self-expression, expression of sexuality. And along with other artists, he began teaching at the New School of Art, which was the antithesis of OCAD. And in what I've read about him, he was a really fascinating and contradictory character of great infamy in Toronto. More on that later, but let's dive into the work now. There it is. There's our angel. The origin story is incredible. In 1979, Markle won a commission to decorate a Toronto burger joint, a fancy one, which is actually very close by to where I live, near St. Lawrence Market. And it was named Markelangelo's in his honor. The restaurant itself only lasted a few years, but he designed both the interior and exterior with various depictions of angels. There's a close-up, mainly in the form of a female figure. And perhaps we can guess that the design of the space was a cheeky nod to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, which also has its fair share of angels. But yeah, as Renee has been flipping through some really great time capsule images of the restaurant's interior. You can see the rattan chairs there, classic 80s. So if we can go back to the angel, we can talk about her a little more. So the angel's wood with acrylic paint and neon lights, and there are Robert Markle signatures on this angel. First, she is a female nude, but if you look closely, she is wearing high heels. And heels and stilettos are a signature of Robert Markle's, and the way he depicted them evolved throughout his practice, but they were definitely a signature motif in his nudes. And another interesting thing about this work is that its original intent was to be out there in the world for passerbys and patrons of the restaurant. Art meant to be enjoyed and consumed in daily life, but once the restaurant closed, these angels became individuals and individual artworks in their own right. So I find that story of consumer decorative design to inside the gallery spaces a very interesting one. And yeah, this close-up is great. You can see her hair is that pink neon swirl, and her wings are the blue neon, and she has her nails painted. It's wonderful.
I'd like to just go back to this photo quickly.
Yeah.
So epic. And he's holding so casually another work of his. This is an earlier work, and it's very typical of his work from the, I'd say, mid to late 60s. Again, female nude, and at the time, though, they were considered to be super controversial, as Nadia mentioned, but such a great photo.
Great.
And we were just loving these images of Michelangelo's restaurant so much. And I don't know if you mentioned this, but it was only open for about 2 years, I think.
Yeah, legacy was a couple of years, but it lives on. It lives on in our gallery. You'll see it when you come in.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move into the discussion portion of the talk, and we're going to ask each other some questions. I think, Renee, we're going to start by asking me a few questions, then we'll switch.
Yes, that's right. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So still on the subject of Markle, did you want to talk a little bit more about why he was so controversial in Toronto during his career?
Yes, there is actually a particular anecdote that relates to this that's fascinating. In 1965, there was a now famous raid by the morality police where they removed Markle's drawings from the Dorothy Cameron Gallery in an exhibition called Eros 65. And all this move ended up doing was solidifying his celebrity status because there was so much publicity around the raid. They were seized on a charge of obscenity, and therefore that drew a lot of media attention. This is especially interesting when we think about all the nudes we see in museums today, and the almost cyclical nature of popular subjects in art. And the nude is definitely one of those subjects that keeps recurring in different ways through art history. And a little interesting tidbit about the AGO is back in 1931, when it was the Art Gallery of Toronto, they removed works of all naked figures from the walls. And a decade later, in 1940s, the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts did the same thing. So it was this like pearl-clutchingly shocking thing to see a nude in a public art gallery at that time. But today we hardly think twice about seeing them. I'm thinking of our recent Rubens show and all the nudes that were present in there. But the female nude in art history is a whole subject unto itself, so I'll leave that there. But it really is fascinating to see the oscillation in popularity of subjects in artworks.
So Robert Markle, being someone who is so interested in the female body and depicting it in a kind of an empowered way, how can we discuss him as a male artist working in these milieu that might be seen as anti-feminist? How can we discuss him from a feminist perspective?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I've been reading that he was kind of a head scratcher when it came to feminism in the art world and feminist critique. It was very clear that he loved women, but he was coming into his own as an artist at a time when feminism wasn't defined the way we know it now. It was called women's lib, for example, and a feminist wasn't called a feminist. She was called a women's libber. So that should add some context to the time that he was working in. But yeah, despite his relentless pursuit of the female nude, he largely escaped feminist critique. But in 1991, which was a year after he died, there was a retrospective of his work, and a Canadian professor named Marjorie Stone posed the question, what is a feminist to do with Robert Markle? And she observes that his celebration of female sexuality usually occurs somewhere on the border between the erotic and the grotesque. But as in all art, it's important to participate in the artwork, actively engage with it when viewing it. So engaging in those conversations about gender, the male gaze, etc. It's all part of looking at this artwork. So yeah, I don't know if I can confidently say he was a feminist. He's not here to speak that for himself, but we can definitely look at his work within a feminist lens. Okay, Renee, I'm going to switch it over to you. And I want to ask you some questions about Markle. I know you're interested in his use of neon as an extension of drawing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you brought up the word grotesque, because I hadn't thought of that when looking at Markle's work. But there's something that's like, um, it's sort of unhuman about them. Like they're almost more like land or um, monsters, but they represent beauty, but they're not very beautiful. They are quite grotesque in a way. So I love that complexity about these figures.
Wow.
But anyway, in my curatorial practice, I've always been drawn to drawing, and I like to look at the linear quality of works and the gestural quality, and think about how the artist made them physically in a space. And when I look at this angel, I just love how he's using neon to accentuate the gestural lines of his drawing. What we see are the wings and the hair highlighted in neon, and they almost read as a halo to me. When we think about the history of neon in art, it kind of begins with this really linear, minimal, conceptual usage with artists like Dan Flavin and Joseph Kosuth. But here, Markle, he uses neon as like the gesture of a paintbrush or a pencil, which I find really beautiful. And the drawing or the painting is literally injected with this electricity that is so integral to it. I also really enjoy how this work is it's hanging inside the galleries right now. It's on the second floor, and it's by an elevator. So I think it really suggests this connection to the outdoors, and to because it is a sign, it connects the interior of the gallery to the exterior of the building and the kind of the urban setting in general.
Totally. I love that. I love that you said that he injected electricity into the drawing, because it's exactly what it is. And another interesting thing is that it's hung at a pretty high height. So it could almost read as if the angel is ascending to the heavens right out of the gallery.
Up the elevator.
Out the elevator. There we go. Okay, so we'll switch. I'm going to ask you some questions about Laurel Woodcock now. We're going to return to the quotations. What can you tell us about the importance of architecture, space, and placement in Woodcock's practice?
So as I mentioned, here's an installation view. The quotations are hung near the south entrance. And I believe at night, if they're turned on and you're walking in Grange Park, you could see them from outdoors, and you might wonder, what is this sign trying to tell me? Like, is this a directional sign? Usually neon is used to convey some sort of information or to sell a product. So I think by placing it in somewhere where you can see it outdoors, it might kind of add layers to the potential meanings that it has. I read that Laurel Woodcock actually made this for an exhibition in New York City, where it was installed behind. There were two versions of it. One was installed behind the front desk. So the person working at the front desk was just like inside these quotes. So that obviously changes the meaning of the work so much. And then the other set was hung on the third floor, and it was right at the edges of the windows, I believe. So it was almost like the entire building was in quotation marks. So just thinking about these three different places where it's been installed and how the placement can alter the meaning so dramatically, I think that's really the magical part of this piece, is that it is so mutable and so kind of universal.
Totally, that was amazing, thank you. And just how the space that it hangs can totally transform it, and vice versa. I love that. So I have one more question for you. What does this work tell us about how Woodcock views communication and language?
I think as an artist who is interested in conceptualism, she is at the foundation, she's interested in communication and language and perception. And she's certainly interested in how we make meaning from language. And I think she considered language to be fraught, and aspects of human communication could be complicated. And I think she's illustrating that in this work. I think the quotes embody that something is missing or something is lost in translation. And to me, they really illustrate that that kind of that missing link in communication, which leads us to do this.
Yeah. When words fail, we
yeah. Oh, and I have another image of this.
Oh, nice.
I'm struggling with my mouse today. There you go.
Oh, there's the people.
Yeah, so to give you a bit more scale, and I know that this is a popular photo, like selfie area, and there's some great photos of people in between the quotation marks. So people kind of make it their own as well. And on a clear day, the other work here is also a Laurel Woodcock work, using language and kind of truncating it and complicating it. Yeah, so I mean, we could talk. I feel like Laurel Woodcock and Robert Markle are both so interesting, and we could talk about them for a long time. But we promised ourselves that we would try to make our presentation shorter.
We're really trying.
So I will end there.
Yeah, I think this is a good spot to end. Hope you enjoyed this close look on neon, and I hope you can visit the pieces in person. So thank you so much, Renee. It was great to see you.
Thanks, Nadia. You too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.